This episode is sponsored by Origami Risk, an award-winning, adaptable, cloud-based platform that can help you and your business manage all aspects of resilience, such as risk, safety, insurance, and even the management of business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Because Origami's single platform connects all of these functions, it provides a unified view of risk, leading you to better decision making, thus better business resilience. To help you boost your business's resilience, Origami Risk has put together a collection of free ebooks and videos exclusively for the Resilience Pod family. To get access, visit origamirisk.com/resilience. Enjoy the episode. And welcome back to the Resilience Pod, the podcast helping you become resilient in our world full of disruption. You're here with me, your host, Reena Singh. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today's episode is about how to manage your personal resilience during a disruption to thrive and revive. Wow. With my next guest, who is a leading psychosocial expert in disaster and disruption, co-founder of an organization called Hummingly, and a cognitive scientist. Because of this experience, my next guest has studied how the mind works under prolonged pressure and how we make decisions and how our reactions and behaviors are impacted by stress. What better person to talk about this, because she has experienced and survived the Christchurch earthquake and has lived disaster recovery firsthand, not only for herself, but with her family as well. She is also an author and co-chair of a New Zealand chapter for Australasian Women in Emergencies Network and a humanitarian assistant advisor to the Global Counter-Terrorism Preparedness Network. Amazing. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our very next guest on the Resilience Pod, Jolie Wills, all the way from New Zealand. Welcome.
Thanks, Reena. Isn't it great that we can connect? We're at opposite time zones, opposite part of the world. It's just so nice to be able to connect in this way.
Yes.
So thanks for having me.
You are absolutely welcome, and so nice to have you from the other side of the world joining us on the pod. Really excited to get into this topic that we have today, which is about, as I said earlier, personal resilience and how we can really manage this during a disruption to thrive and revive. So if we get straight into it, my first question is, are we even considering our personal resilience during a disruption / high pressured environment?
I would say yes, but I think what is hard is actually putting it in place. Okay. So I think we consider it, we intend to, but what we find difficult is actually putting it in place. So just as a bit of a background, after the Christchurch earthquakes, I was leading a really large team. So impacted myself, leading a team of people who were impacted, who are out there trying to support people in the community that were impacted. And we really knew that we needed to support them and their resilience through all of this. And so we threw everything we possibly could at this team with a lot of education around resilience and well-being. And what we found, that all the educations, all the support, all the services that we had in place for them at the time, it just wasn't enough. So there seemed to be, in terms of the problem, this gulf between we can know what it is that we should do when we're under pressure, and actually being able to do it when the pressure's on. So for me, I think we consider it, but putting it in place is really hard.
Yeah, and why is it so hard to put yourself first when we all know that we should?
I think it's a mix of things. First of all, we've got some social conditioning, right? We're often conditioned to be accommodating, to really think about the needs of others and to put ourselves behind and the list on our priorities. So, we always seem to get bumped down the list in terms of putting ourselves first. There's an identity piece. So for a lot of people, they kind of identify as the super coper. They might be the glue in their team or in their family. They're the go-to that people come to when they are having a hard time or need something done or need a hand with something. So part of the identity is usually I'm the one that can find a way. I'm the one that makes it happen. And so there's an identity piece, I think, that makes it hard to put ourselves first sometimes. And I think there's a cultural piece, right? It might be the culture of our team or our organization or our wider society that makes it uncomfortable for us to put ourselves first. And perhaps if I tell a story, if that's, So I did some research, and I can unpack that a little bit more later, but looking at other people who had been through disasters around the world, been through prolonged stress. One of the very first people I interviewed was a lady from Kinglake, which is a bushfire impacted community in Australia, been through the Black Saturday bushfires. Wow. And I asked her to explain the impacts of prolonged stress, and why it is so hard to look after yourself. And she said it's kind of like having to carry this ever increasing load of bricks, especially when disruption happens and the bricks just seem to keep coming. And you think you've got them for a tiny bit, but they just seem to last forever, and they just keep accumulating. And then Jill over there is having trouble with her bricks, and quite understandably, because we're all really loaded up. And so Anne will find herself taking on some of Jill's bricks because she is that super coper, the one that always says yes. And she said, and then over time, I'm exhausted, but I'm standing there with all these bricks. And then my manager might say to me, hey, Anne, like, it's really important, the self-care piece. You must look after yourself, but can you do 3 more things for me by the end of the week? So I think there's another piece that as much as we're talking about individual resilience today, I think it's really important to think about the wider picture in an organisation where we can load up even the most capable of people with a load that's too big for too long, and we can break even the most resilient of people. So I think self-care is important, but it's not enough. Like, we need to think about the broader picture as well.
Absolutely. And oh my goodness, like, everything you said is so relevant and resonates to not only anybody else who might not be a resilience practitioner, but just the examples. We do this all the time in our jobs. Like, if you are listening or watching us, you've got to agree that this has resonated with you. So drop us a comment and get in touch to tell me if this has resonated with you. And what you've said at the end about, like, it just it gets higher and higher, then that leads us to burnout, and that doesn't help our resilience, does it? But often, sadly, we see it all the time. So really insightful there, Jolie. Like, why should we, moving forward from this, care about it? Because there are people who say, oh, well, just get on with it, that's our job, we're supposed to do that, life's tough, blah blah blah. But I'd like to know from you why we should really be serious about it.
So if we go back to that team that I was talking about, and we were putting all these resources and supports in around them, the reality is, despite all of that, we were burning them out, right? And we were burning them out at a rate that just was not acceptable. And that was the impact of prolonged stress when we weren't able to find the right way of dealing with it. And it made me realize at the time, this isn't the first disaster, the first mass disruption, this prolonged stress piece. It's not the first disaster the world's ever had. So that led me to do what is called a Winston Churchill Fellowship. So able to travel around the world to all these different disasters and really explore what was the impact of this prolonged stress if we don't really think about managing the resilience piece well. And it was really incredibly sobering. So we should care about it, because what we saw was the impacts in burning out our team that we were seeing, that wasn't an anomaly. Like, we were seeing it in lots of different places and teams and individuals who've been working under prolonged stress. And I've got a list right here that just to the side of my computer that I can literally list through some of the impacts that people reported to me as part of that research.
Wow.
So basically, people operating under prolonged relentless stress, they were damaged by the experience in many ways, like the effects on their general health, huge. There was worker injury, because well-being and health and safety are really connected. Chronic fatigue, weight gain or loss, drug or alcohol abuse, sleep problems, large chunk of their life where people lost a sense of happiness or a quality of life. Compassion fatigue, the inability to feel empathy for others, pessimism, cynicism, and bitterness, real parts of burnout. Everything for forgetfulness and decision-making, so the cognitive piece, there's anger, anxiety, depression, like it just goes on and on, right through. We had suicide, relationships suffer in terms of divorce and availability for children, and a lot of people unable to do that work in the future. So when I think about this, list is still very abstract, right? It's very sobering. But when you hear the stories from people as they report these things, these are real stories, real examples, real people. So it's really sobering. So I think when you think about someone who's standing on a scaffold, like working on at height, you can see in your mind what will go wrong, right? If we don't manage that properly. And I think I'm painting a sobering picture because we don't join the dots very well between the impacts of prolonged stress if we don't manage it well and what might happen. If it was any other hazard, we'd be jumping all over this and being really proactive. So we should care about it because we can't afford not to. If you think about at that individual level, and even at the organisational level too, there was a long list of negative impacts for the organisations as well if you didn't put the right supports and strategies in place. So, and I think just to be the positive side of the picture, we should also care about it because there's a real possibility of growth through adversity. So as hard as it can feel when we're in the depths of it, growth is a real possibility. We know from the research roughly 70% of people will grow even if they have a hard time getting there. So, and it's all about tipping the balance in favor of growth and away from damage. If we have the right tools, we have the right strategies, we can help really jump that gap between knowing what we should do to look after ourselves and actually being able to do it.
Wow, it's the awareness and mindset shift, picking up on your last point there. That's really important. And I love all the examples you've given, and they are real and harrowing. And I don't want to mention it, but I will. Pandemic is like a prolonged stress too, and all those symptoms that you've identified here, well, actually a lot of people have been going through those same things, and it doesn't have to be such a dramatic thing that's going on. I guess it's the time scale these things happen as well, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Crazy. So just to further expand on that, because I mentioned this when I did your introduction, that you've survived the Christchurch earthquake. Like, how did that experience and going through that then, how was that experience for you? And then what changed in your mind? Like, did you feel then actually I could do this, or were you kind of feeling all those emotions that you've just listed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a typical pattern that plays out when we go through a massive disruption of the type that we're experiencing with COVID. And we see it play out after most disasters. It's never ever this neat and tidy, but it's kind of useful to have that pattern in your mind. And it's this, and I experienced all of these phases myself, so to start with, there's this high energy, adrenaline stage where we are all united by this common challenge, right? And there's a lot of energy going out in one direction. We all have a lot to connect over. So there's, very high energy at this point. But because our new world, when it gets turned upside down and we have to reinvent all our routines, that takes a huge amount of energy, right? So we've got a lot of energy going out and sorting out how we live and operate differently. Then you've got energy that is going out to support others, or to hold empathy, or to hold hope, or to deal with your emotions. So really it's this energy depletion exercise. So what we typically see, and I experienced this after the Christchurch earthquake myself, is over time you just get incredibly tired. Like you start off at this cracking pace because the situation demands it, but it doesn't really let up. It goes longer from what we ever anticipate. It's always longer and harder than what we think. And so people get incredibly tired. And then it's at this point we're feeling quite low, and we're all in the same, well, not everybody, but we often end up with a lot of people feeling that same kind of sense of tiredness. And then we can rub up against each other in terms of like just being a little bit emotionally tatty. Yeah. So there's all of that plays out, the blame, the frustration. But then over time, especially if we have some time, allow ourselves some space and time to process and think through it. As I said, more than 70% grow in some ways from this event. But when you're sitting at the bottom there in that trough, it's just useful to know that doesn't mean you're off track, that growth is possible and may well be ahead.
And I love that. And the reason why I asked you that, because obviously you've given all this theory to us, but it's important for our listeners or anybody who's watching to understand and stress that you've actually been through this as well. So it's not you saying here, I've done so much research and this is it, and I have no idea what it's like. Jolie has experienced this. So for those of you who are watching or listening, I invite you to just take a moment to say, actually, there is growth in adversity. Remind yourself that, and, drop us a line to see if this has resonated with you and what has worked. Now, moving on from this, and this is, I guess, the $1 million question, Jolie, is how, like, we know why before I ask that question, let's do a quick recap. We know that we need to consider our personal resilience and why we should care about it, and it's hard to put yourself first and etc. But that $1 million question, how can we manage then our personal resilience during an actual disruption to thrive and revive?
Right. So as I said, I was my own social experiment.
Yes.
In many ways, and we had, a team of people, and we did all this learning. So what it came down to, especially with talking with people all over the world who'd been through something similar, what we learned is that we can intend to do this, but it doesn't lead to us doing it. It usually falls off the bottom of the list. So the first thing is to get really intentional and recognize that hope isn't a method. Right. So have a plan in place. So we at Hummingly actually created a tool to help people do that. Right. So it is the tool, it's called the Doing Well deck, but it's the tool that we wished we'd had for our team to really help bridge that gap between knowing it and doing it. So first thing, put a wellbeing and resilience plan in place. The second thing, what we have found really useful and have had reported from many people in our research, is that having some key anchoring questions, they can really help ground you, especially when everything feels a bit uncertain and wobbly. So just a couple as an example. One of the people I met on my Winston Churchill fellowship and has now become a good friend. She's an amazing recovery leader in her own right, but she tells a story, her name's Kate, and she tells a story of early in her career when she was interviewing for a job. And she said she sat in this interview, she prepared for it, she thought she'd nailed every single question and was feeling really, really good. And then the hiring manager threw a curveball her way and said, so Kate, one last question. Can you just tell me, are you a professional or are you a martyr? And Kate said, pardon? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you explain that? She thought, I was doing so well to now, I don't know. And she said, well, it's quite simple, the manager said. If you are a martyr, then I know that you are going to work so incredibly hard. You're going to have no boundaries. You're going to say yes to everything, but you're going to get an incredible amount done. And we will just run hard and fast with you, and we'll do incredible things for the next maybe 3 to 6 months, maybe a year tops. But, I'll just know that that's the way we're going to operate. And there's no point me investing professional development in you because you will burn out, but I'll just make use of that period in the meantime. But if you're a professional, then I know that you're going to have boundaries in place. You're going to role model this to others, and you're going to be able to really sustain the impact that you have in a really great way. And you're going to have greater impact in the long term. So which is it, Kate? Are you a martyr or are you a professional? So that, and I have to admit that I'm a recovering martyr. So that's one of my anchoring questions. Jolie, are you being a martyr or a professional right now? So that's one anchoring question. Another one that came from our research, there was, again, another phenomenal leader who had an incredible career, really well known and was respected. But at the time that we interviewed her, she was on stress leave. And so she had really experienced some significant burnout. And she took us through the list of impacts, and it was incredibly sobering. But then she said, do you know what, Jolie, this isn't even the scary thing. I'm thinking after this list, what on earth is scarier than this? And she said, well, the scary thing is that when I looked around, my team were about 3 weeks behind me.
Wow.
So the question we learned to ask ourselves from that is, where am I at? Because that's where I'm leading others to. So that might be your team, or it might be your family, or your friends.
Wow.
So where am I at? Am I leading them to a place of calm or chaos? So there's a couple of great, questions. Another one is, what do you value most in your life? And what, therefore, how will I protect it? So if you open up your calendar, are the things that you value most in your life reflected in your calendar or on your to-do list? Because especially under pressure, they usually fall off. And we can do that for a little while, But over a sustained period, those things that we really value, it might be our health or our relationships or our career, those things really erode. So 3 anchoring questions that I find really useful, but you can come up with your own. And lastly, I would say, humans aren't designed to deal with difficult times or to make tough decisions alone. So one of the strategies we say is create your own personal board. Right? Organizations have board to help you see what you're not seeing, to really guide you and steer you in the right direction. So, surround yourself, select some people in your life that are real truth tellers that you really know have your back. They can be perspective checkers for you when you're under pressure and you're blind to yourself. Stress does funny things that way. And they can help you keep perspective and help keep you accountable to the things that you need to do to really manage your personal resilience. So you can refer back to your plan, for example, and give them some responsibility for, asking you some of those anchoring questions or checking in with you on your plan. That'd be my top ones, just top of mind, from that research.
Oh, amazing. And they're, they're so simple, but it's often the simplest things that we never do, or we try to overcomplicate it. And I know for a fact that a lot of us who are working in the resilience industry and beyond probably have never thought about, how can I do my own personal resilience plan? So another question to those of you who are watching or listening, have you got this? Have you got a plan or a checklist? If you do, I'm very impressed and I want to hear from you and exchange ideas. But if you don't, this is gold dust, what Jolie has told us. We really need to consider this. And I'm going to go away actually and do this too, because you're right, look at the calendar. What's important? Well, actually, all the things that are important, are they in my diary or not? And I like the bit where you said about, being a martyr and the boundaries thing, because, everybody is we're all bad at this because we don't want to be seen as not like being collaborative in the workplace or being difficult, but actually you've got to do this. Like sometimes from experience, the boundaries are actually having a lunch break and not replying in your lunch break, and you don't have to reply to an email like 5 seconds after it arrives. Like it's those kind of things, right, Jolie?
Absolutely. And it's all about getting intentional.
I love that. So thank you so much. This has been so eye-opening, and I feel like we could just discuss this for hours and hours, but we've got some really, really valuable and like to the point tips that we can all take away. So thank you so much. Before we close off, do you have any final words or thoughts for our audience?
Oh, great question. I think the main thing is to remember that the risks are really great if you don't prioritize your resilience. But I think the rewards, with incredible opportunities for growth, both personally and professionally, and even collectively, they're there and they're amazing. They're worth really striving for. So
Perfect.
Thank you for having me, Rena.
You are very welcome. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Fantastic insights from you, Jolie. Really appreciate it. And guys, if you have been watching or listening, let us know what you think. Connect with Jolie and tell me if you've got any tips to help you manage your personal resilience during a disruption, like what's worked for you. Let's share it, and then maybe we can create something together to help us all become resilient in our world full of disruptions, because that's what the podcast and we are all about. So until next time, don't forget to subscribe and like this episode, and keep on investing in your resilience.